It's time now for Perspective. Chances are you're one of the hundreds of millions of people who've watched the now iconic YouTube home video called Charlie Bit My Finger, a 55-second clip from 2007 in which a British toddler named Harry gets his finger bitten rather viciously by his baby brother. But it's likely to be leaving the platform soon after it was auctioned off for a six-figure sum as an NFT, or a non-fungible token, a sort of digital proof of sale that means the highest bidder is now, according to the family that made it, the sole owner of this lovable piece of internet history. Well, my guest today is James Bowden, lecturer in financial technology at the University of Strathclyde. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on France 24. Now, I imagine some of our viewers were a little confused by my intro. What exactly is a non-fungible token?
Well, first, thanks for having me on your show today. It's a pleasure to join you. And non-fungible token is essentially a unique object, or a token representing a unique object. So when we think of the US dollar, for example, or a Bitcoin, I can exchange one US dollar for another US dollar. Essentially, that's a fungible item because it's interchangeable, it's not unique. Now, a non-fungible token is unique. So that token represents something that is not interchangeable. So, for example, the Mona Lisa, if I own the Mona Lisa, I can't trade it for another Mona Lisa because there is only one. So that's a non-fungible item. A token is just some data on a blockchain that represents ownership of that item.
So you mentioned it briefly there, referencing the blockchain. For people not aware of what the blockchain is, how does it work and how do NFTs work in turn?
Of course. So blockchain is essentially a distributed ledger. So imagine a ledger that you have in various different aspects of life that record transactions and other types of sales. Now, the blockchain is essentially distributed. So what that means is that there's no one sole owner and arbiter of that ledger. So essentially, that ledger is distributed amongst thousands, tens of thousands of computers across the world. And what that means is that it's essentially, it means that ledger is secure because essentially if someone tries to tamper with the ledger, if you were to, for example, try and change a transaction, because of the distributed nature of that ledger, because so many copies of that ledger exist around the world, it's almost impossible to try and manipulate the blockchain. So in that respect, what we're talking about is a ledger that has a high level of trust and integrity, but isn't maintained by one sole party. And that's where the real key aspect of an NFT comes in, because here we're able to identify who the owner is. Now, as I say, an NFT is recorded on a blockchain such as Ethereum. And what that means is that ownership of that, you mentioned the Charlie Bit My Finger video earlier on, ownership of that video is stored on a blockchain as an NFT. And essentially what that means is that ownership is then recorded and it means that it's secured on the blockchain.
Now, the auction for the Charlie Bit My Finger video drew offers from, I think, 11 accounts and actually sparked a bidding war between two accounts, the latter of which actually ended up winning with an offer of almost $760,000. Who exactly are these people? Why would anyone want an NFT?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can understand where that comment comes from. And, you could level the same comments at the physical art world as well to a certain respect. But essentially, I mean, we're talking about speculative assets here. This is a technology, but it's still in its relatively early phase. There's a lot of hype and a lot of exuberance around NFTs. And so at the moment, the market hasn't really settled and prices are eye-wateringly high as a result. So essentially, you have this kind of speculative aspect, but you also have the prestige of ownership, as you do with collectibles in the real world too. People want to own things, whether that be physical art or whether that be a digital video.
And the prices of a fair number of the very high-profile NFTs are actually have been going down quite considerably from their highs a few months ago. How should we understand that, do you think? Is this just about this all being a speculative bubble, or is there more to it?
Potentially. I mean, yeah, we have, as I say, we have had this period of hype. Now, if we look back to, say, the dot-com bubble, there we had a lot of companies that changed their name to put .com in the company name, and the share price responded by increasing, upwards of 100% in some instances. So you had companies kind of jumping on the bandwagon, and over time, those companies were found out to be essentially junk because the companies failed and investors lost their money. But in the long term, when we look at that dot-com bubble, we did see companies like Amazon emerging from the dot-com bubble. And those are companies that have genuinely changed the way that we do business. I mean, they've changed not only the way that we transact online, but they've also had repercussions for our high street, for example. And I think what we're seeing is potentially the same with NFTs. So we have this initial hype periods where we have a lot of potentially, there are some genuinely valuable items out there, but you also have this flood of new NFTs and items entering the market. And so potentially we're just entering that cooling down period after the initial hype surrounding NFTs.
And then to what extent do you think that NFTs create real opportunities for new business models? For example, artists, I've read that artists can attach stipulations to an NFT, for example, that might ensure that they get some of the proceeds every time their piece of art is sold on, which right now is something that's very, very hard to track, of course.
Yeah, well, this is something that's extremely valuable about NFTs and about blockchains, because, we could say in football, for example, sell-on clauses have existed for a long time. So if I sell a football player to Manchester United, I could stipulate that I will get 10% of the sell-on fee when Manchester United sell that player. Now, that works in football because you have a limited number of participants, and so there's trust in that network of football clubs. But that doesn't really apply in the wider world, because that level of trust is difficult when we have such a large population of people. And so NFTs essentially allow for these sell-on clauses to be written in, because what you're providing is a secure ledger for these transactions to be met. And so you're establishing that trust. And so what that means is that artists could potentially stipulate, if I sell this piece of art to you today, I will get 10% of any future sell-on fee. Now, as you can imagine, that could be extremely beneficial for an artist that's emerging just now, that might be in a few years' time extremely collectible, and the price of their work may increase. For that artist, that's a huge opportunity for them.
James Bowden, fascinating stuff. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. James Bowden, lecturer in financial technology at the University of Strathclyde. Thank you so much for speaking to us today.